I was staring out my kitchen window at 40 tons of dirty, road salted snow covering my entire back field when I realized my neighbors had finally gone too far. The massive pile stretched at least 50 feet across and rose nearly 12 feet high, blocking the view of the Idaho mountains I'd bought this property for in the first place. It was early March in Boise, and I'd been enjoying the natural melt that was turning everything green again. Now my field looked like the dumping ground for a city snow removal operation, which, as it turned out, was exactly what it had become. My name is Vincent Vance, and I'd moved to this 5-acre property just outside the Boise city limits about 2 years ago. The house sat on a quiet rural road, far enough from the city to feel peaceful but close enough to get groceries without planning an expedition. When I bought the place, I specifically chose a property that wasn't part of any HOA. I'd heard the horror stories, and I wanted no part of that nightmare. What I didn't account for was that the property directly behind mine, separated by a simple wire fence, belonged to the Sunset Ridge HOA community, and their president, a woman named Patricia Helmsworth, had apparently decided that my field was community property. I pulled on my boots and headed outside, my breath forming clouds in the cold morning air. The temperature was hovering around 38 degrees, warm enough that the snow was already starting to weep at the edges, sending little rivulets of water across my field. I walked closer to the pile, and the smell hit me, that distinctive odor of road salt mixed with gasoline residue and whatever else gets kicked up when snow plows scrape asphalt for 3 months straight. This wasn't clean snow. This was the disgusting gray and black mixture that accumulates on roadsides, full of chemicals and debris. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures, walking around the entire perimeter of the pile. My work boots squished in the muddy ground, already saturated from the melt. I documented everything, the tire tracks leading from the gate in my back fence that I definitely hadn't left open, the way the snow was piled right on top of what had been a nice flat section of field where I'd been planning to plant wildflowers this spring. And most importantly, the industrial plow truck still parked just inside my property line, its driver apparently taking a coffee break. I walked over to the truck, a massive orange beast with Sunset Ridge HOA printed on the side panel. The driver, a guy in his 50s with a thick beard and a bored expression, looked down at me through the open window. "Morning," I said, keeping my voice level. "You want to explain why you're dumping snow on my property?" He took a long sip of his coffee. "Just following orders, man. Patricia said this was part of the community dumping area." "Patricia is wrong. This is private property, my property, not part of your HOA." The driver shrugged. "Take it up with her. I just drive where they tell me." "How much snow did you dump here?" "This is the 4th load, about 10 tons each. So yeah, 40 tons give or take." He said it casually, like we were discussing the weather. "And it didn't occur to you that this might not be legal?" Another shrug. "I get paid either way." I took a picture of him, the truck, and the license plate. "Well, you can tell Patricia that she needs to remove every ounce of this snow by end of business today, or I'm calling the sheriff." The driver actually laughed at that. "Good luck, buddy. Sheriff's office doesn't care about property disputes. That's civil court territory." He wasn't entirely wrong, which annoyed me. I stepped back as he started the engine and rumbled out through my gate, leaving it wide open behind him. I walked over and closed it, noting that the chain I'd had on it was cut cleanly through. That was destruction of property right there, but as the driver had helpfully pointed out, getting law enforcement involved in what they'd see as a neighbor dispute was going to be difficult. I headed back to my house and immediately started researching. I pulled up my property survey, my deed, and every document I had proving the boundaries of my land. Then I looked up the Sunset Ridge HOA boundaries. Sure enough, they stopped at the fence line. My 5 acres were clearly outside their jurisdiction, purchased before the HOA was even established 8 years ago. I had all the documentation I needed. Next, I drafted a formal cease and desist letter. I wasn't a lawyer, but I'd worked as a paralegal for 3 years before switching careers to software development, so I knew my way around legal language. I detailed the trespassing, the property damage from the cut chain, the environmental concerns about dumping road salt on private land, and the demand for immediate removal of all snow. I gave them 24 hours. Then I drove to the Sunset Ridge HOA office, a small building attached to their clubhouse that sat right on the other side of my back fence. The clubhouse was one of those fancy community centers that HOAs love to build to justify their fees, complete with a pool, gym, and meeting spaces. I'd never been inside, having no reason or right to use it, but I'd heard from former neighbors who'd moved out of the development that it was quite nice. Too bad it sat at a slightly lower elevation than my field. Patricia Helmsworth sat behind a large oak desk that seemed far too grand for the small office. She was exactly what you'd expect from an HOA president, who'd use someone else's property as a dumping ground. Perfectly styled blonde hair, a pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, and an expression that suggested she smelled something unpleasant whenever she looked at anything that didn't meet her exacting standards. "Mr. Vance," she said, not bothering to stand or offer a handshake. "I assume you're here about the snow removal. You assume correctly. That's my property you dumped on." She pulled out a map, spreading it across her desk with the confidence of someone who believes they're always right. "Actually, according to our records, that field is designated community land. Your records are wrong." I placed my property survey next to her map. "This is the official county survey. That's my land, all 5 acres. Your HOA ends at the fence line." She barely glanced at my documents. "There must be some mistake. We've been using that area for snow dumping for the past 3 winters. Then you've been trespassing for 3 winters. This is my first winter here and I'm telling you to stop. I have a cease and desist letter here demanding you remove all the snow within 24 hours. Patricia actually laughed, a sharp sound without any humor. "That's not going to happen. Do you have any idea how much it costs to remove 40 tons of snow, and where would we put it?" "Not my problem. You put it there illegally, you remove it legally. Maybe try your own property next time. We have no space on HOA property. The community has rules about aesthetics, and giant piles of dirty snow don't meet our standards. But dumping it on my property without permission does." She stood up, smoothing her suit jacket. "Mr. Vance, I'm trying to be neighborly here. That snow will melt naturally in a few weeks. Then you can use your field again. What's the harm in being a good neighbor? The harm is that you're breaking the law. The harm is that you cut through my chain and trespassed on my property. The harm is that you've dumped 40 tons of salt-saturated, chemical-filled snow that's going to kill anything growing there. And the harm is that you're telling me my property rights don't matter because you find them inconvenient." Patricia's face hardened. "I think we're done here. If you want to pursue legal action, get a lawyer. Until then, the snow stays. We're not wasting community funds on your tantrum." I placed the cease and desist letter on her desk. 24 hours. Consider yourself notified." I left before I said something I'd regret. Back in my truck, I sat for a moment trying to decide my next move. Legal action would take months and cost thousands. The sheriff's department would treat it as a civil matter. Code enforcement might care about the illegal dumping, but they'd also take time to investigate. Meanwhile, the snow would sit there, leaking chemicals into my soil and making a mess of my property. That's when I got the idea. It was risky, possibly stupid, but it would solve multiple problems at once. I drove home and spent the next few hours researching and making phone calls. The first call was to a rental company in Boise. "Yeah, I need to rent some industrial water pumps, the big ones." "How many gallons per minute can they move?" "Perfect. I need 4 of them delivered tomorrow morning." "Also, do you rent large capacity water heaters? The kind used for construction sites?" "Great. I'll take 2 of those as well." The second call was to my insurance company, just to verify my coverage on my property. Everything checked out. The third call was to a civil attorney I'd worked with at my old paralegal job. Her name was Amanda Foster, and she specialized in property disputes. "Vincent, long time no hear." "What's going on?" I explained the situation in detail. She listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. "Okay," she said when I finished. "So they've definitely trespassed and dumped on your property. You have clear documentation. The problem is timeline. If we file a civil suit, you're looking at months before any resolution. If we go for a temporary restraining order to force removal, that's faster but still weeks. They're gambling that you'll just accept it because fighting is too expensive and time-consuming. What if I remove it myself?" "How?" "By melting it. Fast." There was a pause. "Explain." "My property slopes slightly downward toward the back fence. On the other side of that fence, at a lower elevation, sits their clubhouse. If I melted that snow quickly, the water would naturally flow downhill, following the grade of my land. What happens after it reaches my property line isn't really my responsibility, is it?" Amanda laughed, then stopped herself. "Vincent, are you seriously considering flooding their clubhouse?" "I'm considering removing the snow from my property using the most efficient method available. Where the water flows after that is a matter of natural drainage and physics. It's not my fault they built their clubhouse at the bottom of a slope without proper drainage considerations. You're playing with fire here. They played first. I'm just finishing the game. If you do this, do it right. Document everything. Every step. Take videos, photos, timestamps. Keep all your rental receipts. Make sure you can prove that you were simply removing something illegally placed on your property. Don't do anything that could be construed as deliberately targeting their building. You're just melting snow that shouldn't be there. Got it? Got it. And Vincent, call me when this blows up, because it will blow up." I spent the rest of that day preparing. I walked my entire property line with a surveying app on my phone, documenting the exact boundaries. I took more photos and videos of the snow pile from every angle. I documented the damage to my chain and gate. I measured the slope of my land, confirming that water would indeed flow toward the back fence and into the HOA property. The grade was about a 3% slope, gentle but definite. I also reviewed the weather forecast. The next 3 days were going to be unseasonably warm, with temperatures in the mid-50s during the day. Perfect melting weather even without my help, but I was going to accelerate the process significantly. That evening, I received a response to my cease and desist letter. It was an email from Patricia, short and dismissive. "Your demands are noted and rejected. The snow will remain until natural melting occurs. If you pursue legal action, we will countersue for harassment and frivolous litigation." I saved the email, printed it, and added it to my documentation file. The equipment arrived at 7 the next morning. 4 industrial pumps, each capable of moving 400 gallons per minute. 2 portable water heaters that could heat water to 140 degrees. A truck full of hoses, connectors, and a massive generator to power everything. The delivery guys looked at me with obvious curiosity. "Big project?" one asked as they unloaded. "Snow removal," I said. He looked at the 40-ton pile. "That's one way to do it." I spent the next 2 hours setting everything up. I ran hoses from my well to the water heaters, then from the heaters to the pumps. I positioned the pumps around the snow pile and aimed the discharge hoses directly at the snow from multiple angles. The whole setup looked like something from an industrial site, which I suppose it was. I started recording video on my phone, making sure to narrate the date, time, and what I was doing. This is Vincent Vance, documenting the removal of 40 tons of snow illegally dumped on my property by Sunset Ridge HOA. After my cease and desist was rejected, I'm removing the snow myself using heated water and pumps. The snow was placed here without permission, and I'm simply clearing my property. Then I fired up the generator and turned on the system. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Hot water sprayed from 4 different hoses, hitting the snow pile with tremendous force. Steam rose in massive clouds as the 140-degree water hit the freezing snow. The pile began to collapse almost immediately, the hot water carving channels and causing sections to slough off. Within minutes, water was rushing across my field in sheets, exactly as I'd calculated, flowing steadily downhill toward the back fence. I monitored everything carefully, adjusting the hoses to ensure even melting. The pile was so large that even with 4 high-capacity pumps, I estimated it would take most of the day to completely melt. That was fine. I'd taken the day off work specifically for this. Around 9 in the morning, I noticed someone from the HOA standing at the fence, watching in apparent shock. I waved but continued my work. By 10, there were 3 people watching. By 11, Patricia herself appeared, her face red with either cold or anger. She shouted something, but I couldn't hear her over the noise of the generator and pumps. I walked closer to the fence, keeping my phone recording. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she screamed. "Removing the snow you illegally dumped on my property. You refused to do it, so I'm handling it myself. You're flooding our property. I'm melting snow on my property. Where the water goes after it leaves my land isn't my responsibility. Maybe you should have thought about drainage before building your clubhouse at the bottom of a slope. We're calling the police. Please do. Make sure to explain how you illegally dumped 40 tons of snow on my property first." She stormed off, and sure enough, within 20 minutes, a sheriff's deputy pulled up to my front driveway. I turned off the pumps and walked around to meet him. Deputy Martinez was a young guy, probably late 20s, and he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Sir, we received a complaint about flooding. Come with me. I'll show you what's happening." I walked him around to the back, showing him the melting snow pile first. That snow was illegally dumped on my property 2 days ago by the Sunset Ridge HOA. I have documentation showing this is my land, not theirs. I sent a cease and desist demanding removal. They refused, so I'm removing it myself. I showed him the property survey, the photos of the truck dumping snow, the cut chain, and the rejection email from Patricia. "So you're melting it with hot water?" "Yes, it's the fastest way to remove it. And the water is going onto their property. The water is following the natural grade of my land. My property slopes toward their property. I'm not pumping water onto their land. I'm melting snow on my land and water flows downhill." Martinez looked at the setup, then at the HOA property beyond the fence. I could see water pooling near their clubhouse, though from this angle I couldn't tell how bad it was. "Sir, they're claiming you're deliberately flooding their building." "I'm deliberately removing snow from my property. The flooding is a consequence of them putting the snow here in the first place. If they'd removed it when I asked, or better yet, never dumped it here, there would be no problem." Martinez sighed and made some notes. "Look, this is really a civil matter. They trespassed and dumped snow on your property without permission. You're removing it. The fact that the removal causes them problems isn't really a criminal issue, but you might want to consider that you're starting a war here. They started the war when they decided my property rights didn't matter. Fair enough. I'll file a report documenting what I've seen. If they want to pursue anything, it'll have to be through civil court." After he left, I restarted the pumps. Over the next several hours, the snow pile steadily shrank. The water flow never stopped, cascading down my field in multiple streams that converged into a substantial flow by the time they reached the fence line. I could see the water going under the fence and spreading across the HOA property. Around 3 in the afternoon, I heard shouting and looked over to see several HOA residents trying to divert the water away from the clubhouse using sandbags and plastic barriers. It wasn't going well. There was simply too much water, and it was coming too fast. The clubhouse sat in a slight depression, almost like it was designed to collect water, and despite their efforts, I could see water reaching the building's foundation. By 5 o'clock, the snow pile was about 60% gone. The water flow had diminished slightly, but was still substantial. I could see water actually entering the clubhouse through the lower-level entrance. Several people were inside, apparently trying to move things to higher ground. Patricia appeared at my fence again, this time with 2 other women who looked equally angry. "You need to stop this right now," she demanded. "You're destroying our clubhouse. I'm removing snow from my property." "There has to be another way." "There was. You could have removed it when I asked. You chose not to. We'll pay for removal. Just stop the water." I walked closer to the fence. "You'll pay for complete professional removal of all remaining snow, and you'll compensate me for the damage to my chain and gate, and you'll guarantee in writing that you'll never dump anything on my property again." "Yes, fine. Whatever you want. Get it in writing. Have it signed by all HOA board members and delivered to me within 1 hour. Until then, I'm continuing with the removal." She practically ran back toward the clubhouse. I kept the pumps running. 50 minutes later, a man in his 60s approached my front door. He introduced himself as Gerald Stromberg, the HOA vice president. He handed me a document printed on HOA letterhead. The document agreed to pay for professional removal of all remaining snow, compensate me $500 for the damaged chain and gate, and included a legally binding promise never to use my property for any purpose without written permission. It was signed by Patricia, Gerald, and 3 other board members. "The water's gotten into the lower level," Gerald said quietly. "The gym equipment is ruined. The basement storage is flooded. We're talking tens of thousands in damages. You put 40 tons of snow on my property without permission." I know. Patricia was wrong. Some of us tried to tell her that, but she insisted the property was community land. She was too proud to back down when you proved her wrong. And now you're all paying the price. "Yes. Will you please stop the water?" I looked at the document again. It was legally binding and exactly what I wanted. "I'll shut down the operation, but the remaining snow will need professional removal by end of business tomorrow. I'll have a company here first thing in the morning." I turned off the pumps and disconnected the hoses. The water flow slowed to a trickle, then stopped, but the damage was done. I walked to my back fence and looked at the clubhouse. Water was clearly visible through the lower windows, at least a foot deep in some areas. People were still inside, trying to salvage what they could. That evening, Amanda called me. "I heard through the grapevine that you actually did it, please tell me you documented everything, every second. Good, because I'm guessing you're about to be sued." They signed an agreement to remove the snow and never use my property again. That won't stop them from suing for damages to the clubhouse. They'll argue you acted with deliberate malice and caused destruction beyond what was necessary to remove the snow. Can they win? Maybe. It depends on how a judge views your actions. You were within your rights to remove the snow. The question is whether your method was reasonable or excessive. Melting 40 tons of snow in one day with heated water when you knew it would flood their building could be seen as vindictive or efficient. That's the argument you'll make. Start preparing now. Get all your documentation in order. Every photo, video, email, and receipt. If they sue, we'll be ready. True to Gerald's word, a professional snow removal company arrived at 6 the next morning. They used front-end loaders to scoop up the remaining snow and haul it away in dump trucks. The operation took most of the day but was impressively efficient. By evening, my field was clear except for some mud and dead grass. The HOA paid the $3,800 removal bill without complaint and delivered a check for $500 for my gate. I thought that might be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I was served with legal papers. The Sunset Ridge HOA was suing me for $85,000 in damages to their clubhouse. The lawsuit claimed I had acted with willful and wanton negligence and had deliberately destroyed HOA property through malicious flooding. I called Amanda immediately. $85,000, I said. That seems excessive. Let me see the itemized damages. I heard papers rustling. Okay, they're claiming water damage to the gym equipment, the basement flooring, drywall, electrical systems, HVAC systems, and a commercial-grade water heater. They're also claiming lost revenue from membership dues because the facility was unusable during repairs, and emotional distress for the members. It's inflated, but not entirely unreasonable given the scope of the damage. So what do? We file a counterclaim. You suffered damages too. They trespassed, dumped waste on your property, damaged your gate, and you had to pay for removal and equipment rental. We'll claim that any damage to their property was the direct result of their illegal actions, making them responsible for their own damages. Over the next few months, the legal battle intensified. The HOA hired a law firm that specialized in property disputes. They conducted discovery, demanding all my documentation, which I provided. They took depositions, during which Patricia repeatedly insisted that she had believed my property was community land, despite having been shown the survey. Our counterclaim listed $4,200 in actual damages. The cost of the equipment rental, my gate repair, and the environmental remediation I'd had to do to address the salt contamination in my soil. We also claimed that the HOA's actions constituted intentional trespass and illegal dumping, making them liable for all resulting damages. The case dragged on through spring and into summer. The HOA completed repairs on their clubhouse, which actually came to about $67,000 according to the receipts they provided in discovery. That was less than their initial claim, but still substantial. The breakthrough came during a deposition with the truck driver who dumped the snow. His name was Carl Winters, and he was surprisingly candid. "Did Patricia Helmsworth show you any documentation proving the field was HOA property?" Amanda asked. "No, madam. She just pointed at it and said to dump there." "Did you ask to see proof that it was HOA land?" "I did, actually." She said she didn't need to show me anything, that she was the HOA president and knew what land belonged to the community. "And when Mr. Vance confronted you and said it was private property?" I believed him. I told Patricia about it after that load. She said to ignore him and keep dumping. So she was informed that the property owner objected, and she ordered you to continue dumping anyway. Yes, madam. That testimony was devastating for their case. It proved Patricia had knowingly trespassed after being informed of the actual property boundaries. The judge assigned to our case was a woman in her 50s named Judge Catherine Morrison. She had a reputation for no-nonsense rulings and little patience for frivolous litigation. The trial took place in mid-August at the Ada County Courthouse in Boise. It lasted 3 days. The HOA's attorneys argued that I had acted excessively and maliciously, that there were other methods of snow removal that wouldn't have caused flooding, and that I had known my actions would damage their property, but proceeded anyway. Amanda countered that I had repeatedly asked for the snow to be removed, that the HOA had refused, and that I had chosen an efficient method of removal using equipment available for rent in any major city. She presented the property survey, the cease and desist letter, Patricia's rejection email, and Carl Winters's testimony. She argued that any damage was the direct and foreseeable result of the HOA's illegal dumping, and that they couldn't claim innocence after being explicitly told they were trespassing. The most dramatic moment came when Patricia testified. Under cross-examination, Amanda asked her directly about the property survey I'd shown her. Mrs. Helmsworth, when Mr. Vance showed you the official county survey proving the field was his property, what did you do? I told him there must be a mistake. Did you check with the county recorder's office? No. Did you consult with an attorney? No. Did you do anything to verify whether your maps or his survey were correct? I knew our maps were correct. How did you know that? Because we'd been using that field for 3 winters. So your evidence that you owned the property was that you'd been trespassing on it for 3 years. The courtroom actually chuckled at that. Patricia's face turned red. We weren't trespassing. We thought it was community land. But when presented with evidence that it wasn't, you did nothing to verify the truth. You simply insisted you were right and continued dumping snow. Is that correct? I was acting in the best interest of the HOA. By breaking the law, objection, the HOA attorney said. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Morrison said, but she was looking at Patricia with an expression that suggested she'd already reached her own conclusions. After closing arguments, Judge Morrison took a 1-hour recess to review the evidence. When she returned, her ruling was swift and decisive. I find that the defendant, Vincent Vance, acted within his property rights to remove snow that was illegally dumped on his land. The plaintiff, Sunset Ridge HOA, committed trespass and illegal dumping despite being informed that they were doing so. The damages to the HOA clubhouse, while unfortunate, were the direct result of the HOA's illegal actions. She paused, looking directly at Patricia. Mrs. Helmsworth, your testimony makes clear that you were informed this was private property, shown documentation proving it, and you chose to ignore that information and continue trespassing. That is not an error in judgment. That is willful misconduct. Turning back to her notes, she continued. The plaintiff's lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I am granting the defendant's counterclaim in full. The Sunset Ridge HOA is ordered to pay Mr. Vance $4,200 in damages, plus his legal fees, which appear to be approximately $12,000 based on the billing records submitted. The HOA's attorneys objected, arguing that my legal fees were excessive, but Judge Morrison shut that down quickly. The defendant was forced to defend himself against a lawsuit stemming entirely from the plaintiff's illegal actions. He is entitled to full compensation for the costs of that defense. She banged her gavel. This matter is concluded. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The whole ordeal had taken 7 months from start to finish, but it was over and I'd won. Amanda walked with me to the parking lot. That went better than I expected. Morrison didn't hold back. What happens now? They pay you. If they don't, we can garnish their accounts. With an HOA, that's pretty straightforward since they have regular dues coming in. Do you think Patricia will finally leave me alone? I think Patricia might not be HOA president much longer. That testimony about knowingly ignoring property rights after being informed, that's going to be a problem for her. HOA boards can remove officers, and I'm guessing the other board members aren't happy about the $67,000 repair bill and the $16,000 they're about to pay you. She was right. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that an emergency HOA board meeting was called 3 days after the trial. Patricia was removed as president by a unanimous vote of the other board members. Gerald Stromberg took over as interim president. The check for $20,200 arrived 2 weeks later. I deposited it and finally felt like the whole nightmare was truly over. My field recovered slowly. The salt contamination had killed a section of grass, but I worked with a landscaper to remediate the soil and reseed. By fall, you couldn't tell anything had happened there. I planted the wildflowers I'd originally wanted, and they bloomed beautifully the next spring. I also installed a proper gate with a heavy-duty lock and added security cameras covering my entire back fence line. If anyone from the HOA even looked at my property wrong, I'd have video evidence. Interestingly, once Patricia was gone, relations with the HOA actually improved. Gerald stopped by a few months after the trial to apologize personally. "Most of us had no idea Patricia was dumping on your land," he said. "We thought she'd arranged for dumping at a commercial site. When the bills came through showing payments to your property address, we started asking questions, but by then it was too late. She really thought she could just take what she wanted. Patricia had been president for 6 years. She was used to getting her way. The problem with HOAs is that they attract people who like control, and sometimes that goes too far. We've implemented new rules requiring board approval for any contracts or major decisions. No more one-person shows. Good. I hope the clubhouse repairs went okay." They did. Insurance covered about half after we met the deductible. The rest came from reserves. It hurt, but we'll recover. The gym equipment was actually pretty old, so in a weird way, the insurance payout let us upgrade. Silver lining, I guess. Look, I know we got off on the wrong foot, but if you ever want to use the clubhouse facilities, you're welcome. No charge. It's the least we can do. I appreciate that, but I'm pretty happy keeping my distance from HOA business, he laughed. Can't blame you there. As the months passed, life returned to normal. I went back to my quiet routine of working from home, enjoying my property and appreciating the mountain views without 40 tons of snow blocking them. The wildflowers attracted bees and butterflies, exactly as I'd hoped. My field became a small natural meadow, much nicer than any manicured HOA lawn. I did occasionally see Patricia around town. She pretended not to recognize me, which was fine. I heard she'd moved out of Sunset Ridge entirely, selling her home and buying something in a different development where she could start fresh, without the reputation of the HOA president, who cost her community $80,000. The whole experience taught me something important about standing up for your rights. When someone tramples on your property, whether literally or figuratively, you can't just accept it because fighting back seems difficult or expensive. Sometimes you have to take action, even if that action is unconventional. Would I melt 40 tons of snow again if faced with the same situation? Absolutely. But hopefully, I'd never have to, The story made the rounds in local news, though I declined all interview requests. There were articles in the Boise Press about HOA overreach and property rights, using my case as an example. A few local lawyers even started using it as a teaching case for property law seminars. Amanda told me she'd received several calls from people facing similar HOA issues, inspired by my case to fight back against overreach. That felt good. Nobody should have to deal with organizations that think they can ignore property rights because it's convenient. As winter approached again, I watched the first snowfall with a mixture of appreciation for its beauty and wariness about where it might end up. But my cameras and locked gate remained undisturbed. The HOA had learned their lesson. Gerald was true to his word about reforming the HOA's governance. They brought in a property management company to handle day-to-day operations, which reduced the power of any single board member. They also established clear protocols for snow removal that involved only HOA property, with documentation required for any alternative sites. I ran into Carl Winters, the truck driver at a hardware store in early December. He recognized me and came over. "Hey, you're the guy with the snow thing," he said. "That's me. Just wanted you to know I quit working for HOAs. Too much drama. I'm doing commercial snow removal now. Parking lots, business parks, much simpler. Probably a good move." Yeah, that whole situation was crazy. I felt bad being in the middle of it. You weren't the problem. You were just doing your job. Still, I should have pushed back harder when you told me it was private property. Live and learn, right? Right. As the second winter passed without incident, I finally felt like the whole ordeal was truly behind me. My property was secure, my rights were established, and the HOA knew better than to mess with me. I spent more time enjoying my land, taking long walks through the field, watching the wildlife that had returned once the chemical-laden snow was gone. Deer visited regularly, along with rabbits, foxes, and an impressive variety of birds. It was everything I'd wanted when I bought the place. The wildflowers had reseeded themselves naturally, and the following spring promised an even better display. I'd added some native Idaho plants as well, creating a genuinely natural landscape that required minimal maintenance and supported the local ecosystem. One evening in late March, exactly 1 year after the snow incident, I was sitting on my back porch watching the sunset when I heard a knock at my front door. It was Gerald, holding a bottle of wine. "Peace offering," he said. "This is from the board. We wanted to mark the anniversary of, well, the incident, and to thank me, for forcing us to get our act together. The HOA is better run now than it's been in years. We're transparent, we follow proper procedures, and we actually talk to our neighbors instead of just making assumptions. You taught us an expensive but valuable lesson." I accepted the wine. I wasn't trying to teach anyone anything. I just wanted my property respected. Sometimes the best lessons are the ones we don't mean to teach. We talked for a while about the changes in the HOA, the improvements to the clubhouse that had come from the insurance settlement, and the general state of the neighborhood. It was surprisingly pleasant. After he left, I opened the wine and poured a glass. Sitting on my porch, looking out at my field where 40 tons of snow had once sat, I reflected on the whole experience. Property rights matter. They're not just abstract legal concepts. They're the foundation of ownership, autonomy, and respect. When someone ignores those rights, whether through ignorance or arrogance, the consequences can be severe. Patricia had assumed her position as HOA president gave her authority over my land. She'd confused her limited power within the HOA with actual legal authority. When confronted with evidence of her mistake, she doubled down rather than admit error. That pride cost her community tens of thousands of dollars, cost her the presidency, and ultimately cost her the reputation she'd built over 6 years. For me, the lesson was different. Standing up for yourself is hard. It's expensive, time-consuming, and stressful. But sometimes it's necessary. If I just accepted the snow pile, Patricia would have continued using my field as a dump. She would have learned that property owners could be bullied if you were aggressive enough. Instead, she learned that actions have consequences. The HOA learned that property rights aren't suggestions. And I learned that fighting back, even in unconventional ways, is sometimes the right choice. The wine was good, a nice local Idaho vintage. I raised my glass toward the field where the snow had been, toward the fence line where the water had flowed, and toward the clubhouse that had flooded. To property rights, I said to the empty evening air, and to 40 tons of snow that taught everyone an expensive lesson. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, reflecting off the mountains in the distance. My field was green and peaceful, full of wildflowers and wildlife. The HOA stayed on their side of the fence, and I stayed on mine. It was exactly as it should be. I never did use their clubhouse facilities, despite Gerald's offer. I preferred to maintain the clear boundary between my property and theirs. But the gesture was appreciated, a sign that the organization had genuinely changed. Over the following years, I heard occasional stories about other HOA disputes in the area. Some were resolved peacefully, others went to court. Mine became something of a cautionary tale, told at neighborhood gatherings and HOA meetings. The story of the president who dumped 40 tons of snow on private property and ended up with a flooded clubhouse and a lawsuit she couldn't win. I like to think it made at least a few HOA boards think twice before overstepping their authority. My life settled into a comfortable routine. Work, property maintenance, and enjoying the peace and quiet I'd bought the place for. The field cycled through seasons, sometimes green with wildflowers, sometimes covered in natural snow that melted slowly and didn't flood anyone's basement. I never forgot what happened, but I stopped dwelling on it. The whole experience became just another story, something that happened once and was resolved. Life moved on, but every winter when the snow started falling, I made sure my gate was locked and my cameras were functioning. Trust but verify, as they say. The HOA had learned their lesson, but I wasn't taking any chances. And every spring, when the wildflowers bloomed across my field, I remembered that this was exactly what I'd wanted when I bought the property. Natural beauty, peace, and the freedom to enjoy my own land without interference. 40 tons of snow had threatened that. But in the end, all it did was prove that property rights, when defended properly, will prevail. The law was on my side, physics was on my side, and ultimately, justice was on my side. Patricia learned that the hard way. The HOA paid the price. And I got my field back. That was all I'd ever wanted.